Chancy and the Grand Rascal by Sid Fleischman for Will Buckthorn. What it was that made the willow choose that moment to fall, Chancy didn't know. But the tree cracked like a chicken bone. Chancy didn't have time to say howdy. He shouted, "Run!" The tree came roaring down and bounced in a shower of leaves. Chancy's breath stopped short. When the air cleared, Will Buckthorn had vanished. Chancy dropped the axe and leaped forward. "Sir? Uncle Will?" "By the Eternal," answered Will Buckthorn, stepping from behind a nearby tree and looking around for his hat. That's not the friendliest welcome I ever had, Chancy, but it was the windiest." A smile shot to Chancy's eyes. He remembered wondrous stories his mother used to tell about her brother Will. And there he stood. This big curly-haired stranger was his kin. It seemed too marvelous to believe. Chancy found the slouch hat under a branch and began dusting it off. "Howdy, Uncle Will." Then he added, "I'm infernal sorry about that tree." Will Buckthorn studied him carefully. "Chancy, I'd shake your hand if I knew for certain you didn't have a bolt of lightning up your sleeve." "No, sir, I don't." Uncle Will put out his hand. They shook and gazed at each other and grinned. "Let me take a good look at you," said Will Buckthorn. "You're growing up to look like your pa. I can see that. He had hair straight as wheat straw, and you got his nose sharp as an axe, and you smile like him, too." "I declare." Chancy was glad to hear that. He handed back the hat. "But those specks on your eyes you got from your ma. Cat's eyes run in our family, you know." Chancy could see Uncle Will's own cat's eyes. He felt a glow of pride and kinship. To think that he had almost dropped a tree on him. He wondered now how he could have been spooked by the slouch hat. He should have known better than to take Colonel Plug's word for anything. Will Buckthorn's voice softened. "I was almighty slow finding out about your pa and ma, Chancy. I'm desperate sorry." Chancy nodded. "We figured you'd been lost in the war, got eaten by wolves. Miss Russell, she was our neighbor. She wrote you letters, but they all came back." "I must have been living among the Comanches about then, and those folks don't have a mail delivery. You young'uns are the only kin I got left. If I'd known you had been left alone, I'd have escaped quicker." "Comanches!" Chancy murmured in awe. "It wasn't until a few months ago I got back to Erie County and found all you Dundees split up." "Mirandy and little Jamie, too?" Chancy asked. He hadn't had any news of them in 4 years. He'd hoped they might have stayed put, but it wouldn't surprise him if they had been taken 1,000 miles away. "Aren't they still with Miss Russell?" "She's gone too, and never heard from. I don't mind telling you I've been all over the Ohio map picking up your tracks. Traced you to Sandusky, missed you at Squire Starbuck's, missed you at Piccawilly's store. You weren't hard to follow, though. A regiment of folks saw you along the road with your wheelbarrow and chicks. I thought I'd caught up to you at the river, but I headed down river and you headed up. Finally back-trailed it this way and heard you whacking at a tree. But by ginger, I caught up to you at last." Chancy grinned. "I didn't know anybody was looking for me." "You laying up wood for the winter?" "No, sir, I'm starting a wood yard." Uncle Will shoved back his hat. "A wood yard?" "I figure on earning steamboat fare to Paducah," Chancy said. "That's where they took my sister, Indiana. I aim to hunt her up." Uncle Will's face changed, like the sun slipping out of the clouds. "Splendid! See here, I'm handy with a chopping axe. We'll put up your woodpile quicker than a frog can clear his throat. I'm short of steamboat fare myself. I'd like to come along to Paducah with you if you wouldn't mind my company." "Mind?" Chancy's eyes lit up. "By dogs, I'd like to have you along, Uncle Will. Reckon so. Won't Indiana be surprised when we walk in, you and me, and then maybe we could set out for Mirandy and Jamie." "Maybe?" Will Buckthorn's laughter boomed out again. "We'll track 'em down if it takes from July to eternity." Chancy fetched Uncle Will's bedroll and 2 carpet bags and shoved off his chicks and his woodpile. Before long, Uncle Will hung his coat on a limb, borrowed Chancy's axe, and all that afternoon the chips flew like great wet sparks. He'd set his eye on a tree, fell it, split to one side, strip the limbs, and hardly work up a sweat. Chancy's admiration was unbounded. He could hardly drag wood to the pile fast enough to keep up. He had become aware of a muffled sound from one of the carpet bags. It seemed to him a dozen somethings going clickety-click. His eyes kept straying to it throughout the afternoon, but he figured it was none of his business and didn't want to ask about it. By sundown, the wood pile had risen like bread in an oven, and Uncle Will looked over it with satisfaction. "Splendid," he said. "You're stacking the wood good and tight. I've known grown men to lay up cords so loose you could hold a catfight inside. You can tell a man's character by looking at his firewood. Yes, sir, that's a fine wood pile, Chancy." Chancy was eager for Uncle Will's approval. Tomorrow he'd stack the lengths even tighter. They'd have the best wood yard on the river. They ate, sitting against a tree, and watched night come to the Ohio. Chancy already felt that he had known Uncle Will all his life. The air began to sing with bugs and insects. Finally, Uncle Will lit one of his twisted black cigars, and Chancy got out his buckeye to polish it. By dogs, there was a power in it, he thought. To think he had almost pitched it away. Colonel Plug had been bad luck, but there sat Uncle Will beside him. Yes, sir, there was a power in the buckeye after all. "You calculate Indiana will know what happened to Mirandy and little Jamie?" he asked. "Oh, I know where to begin looking for them," Uncle Will said, and Chancy's ears pricked up. "They're somewhere out on the Great Plains." "The Great Plains!" Chancy was stunned. The far prairies west of the Mississippi seemed as remote as the dark side of the moon. "Tarnation!" Uncle Will pulled off his boots. "That's where we'll find them, near as I could find out. Your neighbor lady, Miss Russell, kept the little ones together in Erie County, bless her young heart. But it appears some gentleman was writing her letters and asked to marry her, sight unseen. I reckon she wanted to make a real home for the young'uns. She packed 'em up and lit out west. That was more'n a year ago. That gentleman is a big cattleman, I was told, but no one could recollect his name or where he did his ranchin'. Mirandy and little Jamie could be living anywhere from Texas to Montana, but we'll pick up their trail somehow. I've walked every foot of that country." Chancy felt a flash of hope. With Uncle Will along, the world already seemed a smaller place. Why, once they reached the Great Plains, he could probably whistle loud enough to bring Mirandy and little Jamie running. Again, Chancy's eyes stayed on the carpet bag rattling away. Inside, clickety-click. "How did you escape from the Comanches, Uncle Will?" "I didn't escape exactly. Who told you that?" "You did, sir." "I declare, then it must be so. I thought I was rescued." "Who rescued you?" "A big bull buffalo." "A buffalo!" Chancy exclaimed. Uncle Will laughed. "I do exaggerate occasionally, but that's the solemn truth, Chancy. Remind me sometime and I'll tell you about the winter I lived on tree bark. But about those Comanches, after the war, some of us soldiers were sent out to Indian country. I got ambushed. Those Comanches didn't know what to do with me. I was too big for a man and too small for a buffalo. You can see that." "Yes, sir." "Those Indians kept me along with them for 2 years. I turned into a Comanche myself." "Is that when you lived on tree bark?" "No, we were trailing near the Wyoming border, near as I can figure, when a buffalo stampede came down on us. My horse got tired of me in a hurry and pitched me into the air. The buffalo were so thick around us you couldn't see the ground. I landed on the hide of a big bull buffalo." Chancy was all ears. "He tried to buck me off, but I had no intention of leaving his company. I dug my hands into the shaggy fur at his shoulders and held him tighter than a new boot. He plunged around, snorting fire, and the next thing I knew, he broke away from the herd and went rattling out across the prairie, lickety-whoop. Chancy, it was like hanging on to the wind itself. Didn't he take me for a ride, though? It was tremendous. When he finally got winded and slowed to a walk, I slipped off his rump and thanked him as best I could. The Comanches were miles out of sight. To this day, I believe they're still wondering what happened to me." Chancy basked in the glow of his Uncle Will's adventures. He was enchanted. "Is that when you had to live on tree bark?" "Well, no." And here a different light came into Will Buckthorn's eyes. "That was the following winter, up in Dakota, when I got snowed in. I had nothing to eat but my belt and my boots. They don't taste half bad boiled. After that, there was nothing to do but start in on the tree bark. There are places up in that country where it's 20 miles between trees, but I was lucky. I had all the aspens I could eat, and some bur oak, too. I didn't go hungry, Chancy, you won't believe it, but when spring came along, I'd eaten so much wood that the sap began to rise in my veins, and I broke into bud. That's the almighty truth. And that's not even the worst of it. For 3 months after, I couldn't scratch my back without giving myself splinters." Chancy was almost swallowing the story whole Chancy, after almost swallowing the story whole, now burst into a laugh, and Uncle Will roared. Their voices carried out across the water. Later, they made up beds of leaves and laid out their blankets. The chicks were huddled together with their heads tucked under their wings. Stars swarmed overhead, and a bullfrog began to croak. Then Uncle Will opened the noisy carpet bag. He lifted out a clock, and then another. The bag was almost full of clocks, and all of them rattling away like woodpeckers. "You a clock seller, Uncle Willie?" "Forced into it." He began to wind each clock with a brass key. "I met up with a Connecticut clock peddler in a train depot a few weeks back. I had my tinker's kit and some old socks in a carpet bag. He picked it up by mistake and left me this one. It made a clock peddler out of me. I reckon a tinkerer out of him. Of course, he got the best of it. He's got them spare socks. These clocks are about as easy to sell as toothpicks to a catfish. You'd be surprised how many folks don't give a hang what time it is. I think that Yankee changed bags with me a purpose." "What time is it, Uncle Will?" "Don't know. One of these is bound to tell the right time, but I'll be shot if I know which one it is." Day by day, the woodpile grew, and the hatching came to an end. Chancy had 14 eggs left over, which he put aside to bury. The huge brown egg was among them, untouched, and he was disappointed. In the summer heat, they were no doubt going rotten, and he'd better bury them before one broke and raised a smell. Still, he waited. It was late the following day when he made up his mind to be done with it, and that's when he saw an eggshell split open. It was empty. By dogs, the big brown one had hatched. He looked all around for the chick. He fell to his hands and knees to search in the twilight through the tall grass. He listened for a peeping sound, and soon Uncle Will joined him in the hunt. "That chick couldn't be more than a few hours old, and he's already out seeing the world." Chancy grinned. It was dark. "Better let it go till daylight," Will said. "We might step on him." "I do want that chick," Chancy said. "We'll turn him up before breakfast. Glory be, from the size of that shell, he must have hatched full grown." And that's the end of chapter 4.